My name is Anya, and I'm 32 years old, living in the vibrant, chaotic heart of New York City. I've always believed in the city's promise of opportunity, a place where hard work and talent could truly pave your way. I've built a career in digital marketing, navigating the competitive landscape with a quiet determination that has always served me well. Just last Tuesday, a glossy envelope arrived in my mailbox, nestled between bills and junk mail. It was from the Beacon of Hope Foundation, a prominent charity known for its high-profile galas and influential board members. I'd seen their advertisements on billboards and in upscale magazines, always portraying an image of diverse philanthropy. I opened it, expecting perhaps a general newsletter or an appeal for a smaller, general donation. What I found instead was a beautifully designed card, not an invitation, but a direct request. It was for their annual Unity Gala, an exclusive event I knew nothing about. The card stated, in elegant script, "We invite you to contribute to our mission of fostering a more equitable society." Then, the line that truly stopped me cold, suggested donation for Daughters of Color, $2,000. My breath hitched in my throat. I wasn't invited. Not a general invitation to attend, not even a save the date. Just a direct solicitation for money, specifically categorizing me by my race, for an event I was clearly not meant to attend. It was an immediate, visceral punch to the gut. The audacity of it was staggering. It wasn't a mistake, it was too specific, too targeted. It felt like they were saying, "We want your money, but not your presence." The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I reread the card several times, my fingers tracing the embossed letters. Daughters of Color. The phrase itself felt like a label, a box they were putting me in, not an acknowledgement of my individuality or my contributions to society. It was dehumanizing in its subtle categorization. My mind immediately raced through my past interactions with the foundation. I'd attended a smaller, public-facing event once, a community outreach program they hosted. I remembered feeling a sense of cautious optimism then, hoping they truly championed the causes they claimed. Now that optimism felt naive, shattered by this cold, transactional request. It wasn't about genuine inclusion, it was about optics and financial targets. My identity, my very existence, was being commodified. The $2,000 figure itself felt like a calculated insult. It wasn't a small amount, not something you casually donate. It was a significant sum, clearly intended for those with disposable income, yet they hadn't extended the courtesy of an actual invitation. I thought about the gala itself, the images I'd seen online, glittering ballrooms, famous faces, powerful figures. It was a world I sometimes brushed against in my professional life, but never truly entered. This request highlighted that boundary with stark clarity. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. It was about the subtle, insidious ways that systemic inequality manifests, even in spaces that claim to be working towards equality. This wasn't overt racism, but something far more insidious. It was the kind of discrimination that hides behind polite language and philanthropic endeavors. It was the kind that makes you question your place, your worth, and whether you truly belong anywhere. The anger began to simmer beneath my skin. I placed the card carefully back in its envelope, a strange mix of disbelief and a growing resolve settling over me. This wasn't just a donation request, it was a challenge. And I wasn't going to let it go unanswered. This wasn't just my personal affront. It felt like a microcosm of a larger issue. I knew countless others had faced similar, quiet slights, dismissed as misunderstandings. But this one, for me, felt different. It was too blatant to ignore. The incident with the donation request brought a flood of memories, moments from my past that, at the time, I might have dismissed as isolated incidents. Now, they coalesced into a clearer pattern, a tapestry of subtle exclusions and unspoken expectations. I remember my college days, being one of the few students of color in a predominantly white, elite university. There were always the well-meaning but often clumsy comments, the assumptions about my background or my family's financial status. One professor, after I presented a particularly insightful paper, remarked, "You're so articulate for someone from your background." I smiled politely then, but the sting of that "for someone from your background" lingered, implying a lower expectation. In my early career, I often found myself in meetings where my ideas were initially overlooked, only to be praised when later voiced by a male or white colleague. It was a frustrating dance, learning to navigate those dynamics without losing my voice. There was the time at a networking event. A senior executive mistook me for the catering staff, despite my professional attire and name tag. He quickly apologized, but the assumption, the immediate categorization, was painfully clear. These weren't grand, dramatic acts of racism. They were the quiet cuts, the microaggressions that chipped away at your confidence, making you constantly second-guess yourself, your presence, your worth in certain spaces. They were the moments that taught me to be hyper-aware of how I was perceived, to always be on, to overperform just to be considered equal. It was an exhausting mental burden that many of my peers never had to carry. The charity's request felt like the culmination of all these experiences, a blatant manifestation of that underlying current. It wasn't just an oversight, it was a systemic issue, a reflection of how certain institutions operate. I thought about my parents, who had worked tirelessly to provide me with opportunities they never had. They always taught me to strive for excellence, to break barriers, but also to be aware of the invisible walls that still existed. They had faced far more overt discrimination in their time, but they always emphasized the importance of resilience and dignity. This request, however, felt like a new kind of indignity, cloaked in the guise of progress. It was a reminder that even in a city as diverse and progressive as New York, the old structures of power and privilege still held sway. They simply adapted, finding new, more subtle ways to maintain their exclusivity. I realized that my initial anger was morphing into something more profound, a deep-seated frustration with the performative nature of diversity that so many organizations embraced. It was about checking boxes, not truly opening doors. This wasn't just about me. This was about every daughter of color who had been told they were valuable for their contribution, but not for their full, authentic self in certain elite spaces. It was a universal slight. I decided then that I couldn't just ignore it. I couldn't just throw the request away and forget about it. This was an opportunity, perhaps, to shed light on a pervasive issue that often goes unaddressed. The thought of confronting them, of even just asking questions, felt daunting. But the feeling of injustice was stronger. I had to understand how an organization claiming to promote unity could send such a divisive message. My resolve hardened. This wasn't just about a $2,000 donation. It was about demanding true equity, not just token gestures. It was about challenging the very definition of charity when it came at the cost of dignity. The Beacon of Hope Foundation presented itself as a pillar of the community, a champion for underserved populations. Their mission statement, prominently displayed on their website, spoke of bridging divides and empowering all voices. Their annual gala was always a major event, covered by society pages and local news. It was portrayed as a celebration of their achievements, a gathering of philanthropists dedicated to making a tangible difference in the lives of others. I remembered seeing photos of previous galas, smiling faces, diverse attendees, or at least, a diverse sprinkling of attendees. They always seemed to feature a few prominent individuals of color, carefully placed for public consumption. Their marketing materials showcased heartwarming stories of individuals they had helped, often people from marginalized communities. They painted a picture of genuine impact, of lives transformed through their benevolent efforts. Yet, the dissonance between this public image and my personal experience with their donation request was jarring. It felt like a carefully constructed illusion, designed to garner support without true engagement. I started digging deeper into their online presence, scrutinizing their board members, their past events, their financial reports. I wanted to understand the machine behind the polished facade. Their board was overwhelmingly composed of wealthy, established individuals, predominantly white, with a few token representatives from diverse backgrounds. It was a common setup, but in this context, it felt telling. I noticed a pattern in their diversity initiatives. They often focused on funding programs for communities of color, rather than truly integrating individuals from those communities into their core decision-making or social circles. It was a top-down approach to philanthropy, where the benefactors remained firmly in control, dictating the terms of engagement. They were the givers, and certain groups were the recipients, even when those groups were also potential donors. The gala itself seemed to be an exclusive club, a networking opportunity for the elite, rather than a truly inclusive celebration. The unity in its name felt hollow, a marketing buzzword rather than a lived reality. I found articles praising the foundation for its commitment to diversity, often quoting their CEO, a charismatic woman named Eleanor Vance, who spoke eloquently about social justice and equality. Her words, however, now rang hollow in my ears. They were the kind of platitudes that sounded good on paper but lacked genuine substance when confronted with the reality of their practices. The foundation seemed to operate on the assumption that daughters of color existed primarily as beneficiaries or as sources of funding, rather than as equals who might be invited to the table, to the celebration. It was a subtle form of gatekeeping, a way of maintaining the existing power structures while appearing to be progressive. They wanted the financial support, but not the disruption that true inclusion might bring. This realization solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about a personal slight. It was about exposing a systemic issue within the philanthropic world, where good intentions often masked underlying biases. The more I looked, the more the polished facade began to crack, revealing the uncomfortable truths beneath. The beacon of hope seemed to shine its light selectively, illuminating only what served its own interests. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just let this go. It wasn't enough to be angry. I needed to understand. My marketing background had trained me to analyze, to dig for data, to understand consumer behavior. Now, I would apply those skills to this charity. My first step was to reach out to a friend, Sarah, who worked in PR for a major nonprofit. She had a keen eye for organizational ethics and often had insights into the inner workings of the city's philanthropic scene. I shared the donation request with her, carefully explaining the context. Sarah's initial reaction mirrored mine, a mix of disbelief and quiet outrage. She immediately recognized the problematic nature of the phrasing. "This is audacious, Anya," she said, her brow furrowed. "It's like they're trying to hit a diversity quota for donations without actually diversifying their guest list. It's performative at best, exploitative at worst." She suggested I look into their donor database practices, if possible. Sometimes these things are automated based on demographics they collect. But even then, the intent behind the automation is telling. I also decided to subtly inquire among my professional network. I had some contacts who occasionally attended high-profile charity events. I wanted to know if anyone else had received a similar, uninvited request. No one I spoke to had received an identical request, which made mine feel even more targeted and peculiar. It wasn't a mass mailing error. It was something specific to me, or at least, to a very particular segment of their mailing list. I spent hours poring over their public financial reports, looking for any unusual allocations or discrepancies. While everything seemed legally above board, the sheer scale of their administrative costs seemed disproportionately high. I also looked into the foundation's history, tracing its origins. It was founded by an old, established New York family, known for their wealth and their traditional approach to charity, often favoring exclusive social circles. This historical context painted a clearer picture. The foundation was built on old money and old ways, merely adapting its language to appear modern and inclusive without truly changing its core practices. I even tried calling the foundation's general inquiry line, posing as someone interested in their diversity initiatives. The person on the other end was polite but vague, offering only generic statements about their commitment to all communities. They avoided any specific questions about their gala guest list or their donor segmentation. It was clear they were trained to deflect, to maintain the polished facade I had already begun to see through. My investigation wasn't about finding a smoking gun of illegal activity. It was about understanding the subtle mechanisms of exclusion, the ways in which power structures perpetuate themselves under the guise of benevolence. The more I dug, the more a disturbing pattern emerged. The Beacon of Hope wasn't just a charity, it was a carefully curated social club, where access was granted based on status, not just generosity. And for daughters of color like me, it seemed, our value was primarily quantifiable in dollars, not in our presence or our inherent worth as individuals. This realization fueled my determination even further. I knew I was getting closer to something significant, something that went beyond a simple misunderstanding. This was a systemic issue, and I was determined to bring it to light, however I could. My breakthrough came unexpectedly, through a casual conversation with an old college acquaintance, Marcus, who now worked in IT for a major data analytics firm. He was a whiz with databases and information systems. I cautiously broached the topic, showing him the donation request and explaining my confusion. Marcus, with his technical mind, immediately saw a potential angle I hadn't considered. "This looks like a highly segmented mailing list," he observed, scrutinizing the card. "They're probably using a third-party data broker, or they have a very sophisticated internal system for donor profiling." He offered to do some discreet digging, using his industry connections to see if any data vendors were known for providing such specific demographic segmentation for nonprofits. I agreed, feeling a flicker of hope. A few days later, Marcus called me, his voice low with a mix of surprise and concern. "Anya, I found something. It's not illegal, but it's ethically questionable, to say the least." He explained that the Beacon of Hope Foundation used a specialized data analytics firm, Philanthropic, which boasted advanced algorithms for optimizing donor engagement and identifying high-potential giving segments. Philanthropic, Marcus discovered, had a proprietary algorithm that identified individuals with high net worth and specific demographic markers, including race and gender, for targeted fundraising. They essentially create donor profiles based on perceived giving capacity and diversity appeal, Marcus explained. "Your profile, Anya, likely flagged you as a high-potential daughter of color donor. This meant I wasn't invited because I was meant to be a guest. I was identified as a category from whom they could extract a specific type of donation to fill a specific financial or optical need. The algorithm, in its cold, calculated efficiency, had reduced my identity to a data point, a target for a specific fundraising appeal. It was a chilling realization, far more impersonal and systemic than I had imagined. It wasn't a personal slight from an individual, it was a systemic slight embedded in the very technology they used to manage their relationships. The charity was using data to perpetuate exclusion, not to foster inclusion. This revelation was a gut punch. It wasn't just about being uninvited, it was about being categorized, commodified, and then solicited for a specific, racially tied donation without any genuine engagement. The Unity Gala was a unity for them, the invited elite. For people like me, it was a transactional relationship, where our color was a data point for fundraising, not a reason for genuine connection. The facade hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. The Beacon of Hope was not illuminating a path to equity, it was using sophisticated tools to maintain the status quo, albeit with a diverse-looking veneer. I thanked Marcus, my mind reeling. The truth was far more insidious than simple oversight. It was a deliberate, technologically enabled form of discrimination, cloaked in the language of modern philanthropy. I knew I couldn't just sit on this information. It was too important, too revealing of a deeper problem. The time for quiet reflection was over, it was time for action. The truth, once revealed, settled heavy in my chest. It wasn't just a mistake or a clumsy oversight. It was a calculated strategy, a systemic approach to fundraising that leveraged identity without offering genuine inclusion. My initial anger transformed into a quiet, steely resolve. I knew I couldn't confront the entire foundation, nor did I want to engage in a public battle without a clear strategy. I needed to be precise. I decided to write a letter, not a furious rant, but a carefully worded, professional communication to Eleanor Vance, the CEO. I would lay out my experience, the donation request, and the implications of their data practices. I spent days drafting the letter, refining every sentence, ensuring it was factual, calm, and irrefutable. I included a copy of the donation request card, highlighting the problematic phrasing. I explained how their targeted solicitation, without an accompanying invitation, created a sense of otherness and commodification. I spoke about the irony of a Unity Gala that actively excluded certain daughters of color from attending. I also alluded to my understanding of their data segmentation practices, without revealing my source, suggesting that such methods, while perhaps efficient for fundraising, undermined their stated mission of equity. It was a delicate balance, conveying my profound disappointment and critique without sounding accusatory or emotional. I wanted to provoke thought, not just defensiveness. Before sending it, I showed the letter to Sarah. She read it carefully, nodding. "This is powerful, Anya. It's articulate, it's specific, and it hits them where it hurts, their reputation and their stated values." She advised me to send it certified mail with a return receipt and to keep a copy for my records. They might ignore it, but you'll have proof you tried to engage them privately. The act of writing the letter was cathartic. It allowed me to channel my frustration into a constructive, albeit challenging, form. It was my way of speaking truth to power, however small the initial ripple. I also had an internal confrontation. I had to acknowledge my own complicity in sometimes overlooking these subtle slights, in accepting them as just the way things are. This experience forced me to demand more for myself and for others. Sending the letter felt like a significant step. It was a quiet act of defiance, a refusal to be silently categorized and exploited. I wasn't just a data point. I was a person with a voice and a sense of dignity. I didn't expect an immediate apology or a dramatic change, but I hoped it would plant a seed of discomfort, a moment of reckoning for an organization that prided itself on its progressive image. The silence after sending the letter was almost as loud as the initial request. Days turned into a week, then 2, with no response. It was exactly what I had anticipated, yet still disappointing. It reinforced my belief that these institutions often prefer to maintain their carefully constructed facades rather than engage in genuine self-reflection. But I wasn't done. The silence was just another piece of the puzzle. 2 weeks after sending my letter, I received an unexpected email. It wasn't from Eleanor Vance, the CEO, but from a junior associate in the Foundation's Community Engagement Department. The email was polite, almost overly so, thanking me for my feedback and assuring me that my concerns were being taken seriously. It felt like a standard corporate deflection, designed to appease without commitment. However, the email concluded with an invitation. Ms. Vance would like to personally address your concerns. Would you be available for a brief, private meeting at our offices next Tuesday? My heart pounded. They weren't ignoring me. They were inviting me in. This was an opportunity, but also a potential trap. I consulted with Sarah, who advised caution. Go, but be prepared. They might try to placate you. The meeting took place in a lavish conference room overlooking Central Park. Eleanor Vance, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of polished authority, greeted me with a practiced smile. She began by apologizing for the misunderstanding regarding the donation request, attributing it to an unfortunate oversight in their automated mailing system. Her words felt rehearsed, lacking genuine sincerity. We value all our supporters, Ms. Anya, she stated, her voice smooth. And we would never intentionally exclude anyone. Our mission is truly about unity. I listened patiently, then calmly reiterated my points from the letter, focusing on the specific phrasing and the implications of being solicited without an invitation. I mentioned my understanding of their data segmentation. Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. She paused, then took a deep breath. Ms. Anya, let me be frank. Our foundation, like many others, faces immense pressure to demonstrate diversity in our fundraising. She continued, Our board, our major donors, they want to see that we are reaching out to all communities. And sometimes, the easiest way to show that is through targeted appeals for specific demographics. Then came the twist, delivered with a sigh that seemed almost weary. The truth is, our gala guest list is curated years in advance. It's about maintaining relationships with our long-term, high-net-worth patrons. We simply don't have space for everyone who might wish to attend, she admitted, her gaze meeting mine. But we still need to show our commitment to diversity, and that often means asking for financial support from those communities. The $2,000 request for Daughters of Color was a specific initiative, she revealed, her voice dropping slightly. It was designed to boost our diversity-giving metrics, which are reported to our major funders. It was a chilling admission. My identity, my race, was a metric. My potential donation was a checkbox on a report. The Unity Gala was a performance, and I was merely a potential prop for their financial narrative. The surprise wasn't that they were discriminatory. It was that they were so openly, if reluctantly, admitting to it, framing it as a necessary evil of modern philanthropy. It was a raw, unvarnished look at institutional hypocrisy. Eleanor then offered me a special invitation to a smaller, less exclusive donor appreciation event, a clear attempt to placate me. I declined politely, my mind reeling from the stark truth she had just laid bare. Walking out of the Beacon of Hope Foundation's opulent offices, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no triumph, no sense of victory, but a profound clarity. The truth, however uncomfortable, had been revealed. Eleanor Vance's admission had stripped away the layers of polite language and philanthropic pretense. My identity as a daughter of color was not a reason for inclusion, but a strategic category for financial extraction. The Unity Gala was not about genuine unity, but about maintaining an exclusive social hierarchy while simultaneously showcasing a superficial commitment to diversity through fundraising metrics. This wasn't just about one charity, it was a microcosm of a larger, systemic issue. Many institutions, in their pursuit of diversity, often prioritize optics and financial targets over true equity and inclusion. I realized that the fight against discrimination wasn't always about grand, public battles. Sometimes, it was about recognizing the subtle indignities, the quiet commodification of identity, and choosing not to participate. I decided not to publicly expose the foundation, at least not in a sensational way. Eleanor's reluctant honesty, while self-serving, had given me a deeper understanding of the institutional pressures at play. Instead, I channeled my energy into something more constructive. I began volunteering my marketing expertise to smaller, grassroots organizations in New York that genuinely worked to empower marginalized communities. These organizations didn't have glittering galas or sophisticated data analytics firms. They had passionate people, real impact, and a true commitment to their mission, without the performative facade. I also started speaking more openly about my experiences in professional settings, sharing insights on how to build truly inclusive environments, not just diverse-looking ones. It was about substance over superficiality. The incident with the donation request became a powerful lesson. It taught me to scrutinize claims of diversity and inclusion, to look beyond the polished marketing and into the true practices of organizations. It reinforced my belief that genuine change comes from within, from a shift in values and practices, not just from meeting external quotas or appealing to specific demographics for financial gain. My personal journey had shifted. I was no longer just a professional navigating the city. I was an advocate, using my experiences to shed light on subtle injustices and to champion authentic equity. The $2,000 donation request, initially a source of anger and confusion, had become a catalyst for deeper understanding and meaningful action. It had opened my eyes to the nuanced ways discrimination persists. I learned that true value isn't determined by an organization's willingness to invite you to their exclusive events or by their calculation of your giving potential based on your identity. My worth, and the worth of every daughter of color, was inherent, not contingent on a charity's selective invitation or a targeted donation request. It was a powerful, liberating realization. And as I continued my work, both professionally and as an advocate, I carried that truth with me, a quiet beacon of hope for a future where true unity wasn't just a gala theme, but a lived reality for all.